Thomas Buchanan McGuire, Jr. was born on the 1st of August 1920 in Ridgewood, New Jersey, a leafy commuter suburb whose quiet streets gave little hint that one of America's future air combat legends was learning to ride his tricycle beneath the elms. His mother, Pauline, doted on his quick smile and restless curiosity, while his father, Thomas Sr., a carpenter who knew the insecurity of Depression-era paychecks, worried that the boy's fascination with the sky might one day pull him far from home. When Thomas was still a grade schooler, the family moved south to Sebring, Florida, trading cold winters for orange-scented breezes. There, beneath the wide spaces of the peninsula's interior, he spent long afternoons lying on his back in vacant lots, tracing the silver threads of high-flying transports that drifted toward Miami and Havana. In the evenings, he built balsa gliders on the porch, sanding wingtips smooth while tree frogs croaked in the marsh. He was slender, sharp-eyed, and impatient with anything that felt abstract. Numbers mattered to him only when they described lift or horsepower, and history lived for him not in dates but in the clipped voices of the newsreel pilots describing spirals over Spain and China. By 16, he had talked his way into odd jobs at Hendricks Field, where civilian instructors tutored cadets of the nascent civilian pilot training program. He fetched coffee, wiped oil from cowlings, and listened, always listened, to every anecdote about torque and slipstream. One of the instructors, impressed by the boy's tenacity, offered him 10 minutes in a J3 Cub. McGuire later claimed that the moment the little Continental engine dragged the yellow wings free of the grass strip, he knew he would trade every predictable comfort for the right to command a machine in 3 dimensions. After graduating Sebring High in 1938, he won a slot at Georgia Tech, nominally to study aeronautical engineering, but his notebooks filled less with equations than with sketches of new-shaped fins and cooling intakes. Funds were tight. He waited tables, shelved library books, and in spare moments volunteered at Atlanta's Candler Field, absorbing pattern chatter and emergency checklists. The headlines darkened: Polish cavalry, French exodus, Spitfires clawing over Kent, and McGuire understood that if America entered the war, the fastest path to the cockpit would be uniformed. On July 12, 1941, weeks before his 21st birthday, he enlisted as an aviation cadet in the United States Army Air Corps. Primary flight training at Corsicana, Texas, taught him the ritual of checklist discipline and the lonely arithmetic of dead reckoning across sun-bleached cotton country. Basic at Randolph followed, where the instructors, many still barnstormers at heart, drilled chandelles and lazy eights until muscle memory replaced conscious calculation. At Foster Field's advanced course, the Texan wind slapped BT-13 tailplanes, hard enough that sloppy rudder work meant ground loop. McGuire's logbook, never boastful, simply noted, landings to full stop, smooth. On February 2, 1942, silver wings pinned to his tunic, he accepted his commission as second lieutenant and his first assignment, the newly formed 313th Fighter Squadron at Selfridge Field, Michigan, slated soon for war but not yet sure on which coast. During the spring, the squadron traded cast-off P-40s for the twin-boomed Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Some pilots grumbled that a 2-engined fighter could never match a single-seat hot rod's turn. McGuire reckoned that 2 Allisons meant he was dragging twice the firepower into combat, and that range, those broad Pacific ranges whispered of by ferry pilots, would crown whichever fighter could still loiter after 1,000 miles. He studied the manual until oil-stained corners curled, memorized every cylinder head limit and fuel transfer procedure, and in the mess debated compressibility with anyone who'd listen. Orders finally arrived in March 1943. The 475th Fighter Group would stand up in the Southwest Pacific under 5th Air Force. Transit by Liberty ship was a slow misery of damp hammocks and salt-corroding personal gear, But McGuire spent hours on deck, notebook open, copying outlines of islands he would soon be asked to defend. New Guinea long as a dragon's back, the Bismarcks like shotgun pellets, the Philippines arcing north toward Formosa. At Amberley in Australia, the group drew brand new P-38Hs. Bare aluminum skins shone beneath subtropical sun. McGuire named his aircraft Pudgy, after the childhood nickname of his wife-to-be, Marilyn, a pen pal nurse he had met briefly. While on leave, the moniker would adorn 5 successive lightnings, each with the now familiar caricature of a plump cherub brandishing a lightning bolt. Combat initiation came swiftly. On August 18, 1943, flying escort for B-25s striking Wewak's airfields, McGuire spotted a gaggle of Ki-61 Tonys climbing to intercept. He slid wide, fed throttle until turbo whistles sang, and commenced a spiraling dive that carried him through the enemy formation in a red blur of tracer. One Tony snapped into flames, another skidded wing over wing into the jungle. He landed at Dobodura lily-white with sweat, 2 confirmed kills scrawled on the operations board. The after-action report mentioned his calm radio demeanor, the measured cadence of each call, altitude, heading, ammunition remaining, fuel state. Over the next 10 weeks, he multiplied those tallies above New Britain and over the shipping lanes fringing Rabaul. December 1943 closed with his scoreboard reading 11. He was 23. What distinguished McGuire was not flair. He lacked Richard Bong's theatrical chandeliers of tracer, nor did he cultivate the roguish grin of a Zemke, but an analytical ruthlessness. He dissected every recorded engagement, mapping where sight pictures led to 20mm impacts and where deflection angles lagged fatally behind. In the evenings at Nadzab, while generators thumped and rainforest insects gnawed at lamp glow, he built a library, scraps of intel on Japanese climb rates, roller-processed gun camera strips, chalk-line diagrams of formations tried that afternoon. Junior pilots sought him out. He stressed discipline, stay with your wingman, rely on speed not turn, dive out rather than dogfight below 10,000 feet, where a Zero's elliptical wings bit hardest. One lieutenant, after surviving his first mission because McGuire's lightning had sawed a pursuing Oscar off his tail, wrote home that Captain McGuire flies as though the enemy is a math problem already solved. By February 1944, McGuire was operations officer of the 481st Fighter Squadron. The group's mission set expanded, fighter sweeps ahead of amphibious pushes, dawn patrols to bottle up reinforcements, escort for 5th Air Force's massed B-24, strikes on Kavieng and Hollandia. During the 16th April raid on Hollandia, he claimed his 15th victory, a Zero that tried to claw after a straggling Liberator. McGuire's throttle already sat against the gate, turbos shrieking, and he split est. Behind the Zero, closing from 6 o'clock. The first burst severed the fighter's rudder. The second saw its starboard wing fold like cardboard. 15 victories meant ace 3 times over. It also meant the Japanese had begun to recognize the twin boom silhouette whose nose Flash bore. 4 stubby cannon muzzles. June brought heavy weather and heavier flying. Over Biak, he downed 3 Oscars in a single sortie while nursing a failing turbocharger. The maintenance crew pulled a turbine wheel warped from overspeed, eyed him as if he'd personally threatened the engine. His friend, Charlie MacDonald, joked that McGuire could make those Allisons sing, but Lord they cry afterward. On July 23rd, he shared a quiet bottle of beer with MacDonald and Bong outside Group Ops. Lightning bugs flickered among the palm fronds. Nearby, a jukebox stolen from an Australian club played Glenn Miller through blown speakers. Bong had just chalked his 31st kill. McGuire, sitting at 22, teased that he'd catch up before Thanksgiving. Bong laughed, not least because it sounded entirely plausible. Across autumn, the race between the 2 men became unofficial myth, whispered along the flight line. Headquarters knew a propaganda opportunity when it saw one. Correspondents visited, news cameras whirred while pilots grinned awkwardly in front of revetments. McGuire accepted the attention with stiff politeness. He much preferred the anonymity of the cockpit, but he also felt deep in the bone that staying aloft 1 minute past an enemy's fuel reserve could save a troopship full of infantry. Numbers mattered, because every downed Betty bomber meant fewer suicide dives at Laty's anchorage tomorrow. On December 25, 1944, as American soldiers dug foxholes into the muddy paddies of Mindoro, McGuire led 8 P-38s on a fighter sweep north to Clark Field. Over Luzon's central plain, they bounced a division of 12 Oscars. The engagement dissolved into twisting pairs. McGuire's section scissored above 2 enemy leaders, his first burst blowing the canopy off the nearer Oscar, the second burst soaring through the fuselage of the wingman. Moments later, another fighter attempted a head-on pass. McGuire slid under and raked its belly from spinner to tail. 3 victories in 90 seconds. Smoke from burning wrecks mingled with the sweet rot of harvested cane fields below. The following day, 26th of December, he led the 431st into a melee over Clark again, claiming 4 more Japanese fighters. 7 kills in 2 days set his tally at 38 and earned him the Medal of Honor recommendation, subsequently approved by General Kenny. Yet triumph carried its own shadow. Bong, rotated home on leave with 40 victories, had already been grounded for publicity tours. McGuire, restless, believed 2 more kills would equalize the record, 4 would secure the top slot, and in those calculations lay a danger he rarely acknowledged aloud. Ambition pressed against the margins of risk tolerance. He wrote Marilyn that he felt every flight counted double now, and that when he returned stateside, they would tour the country in a little tailorcraft he might buy on surplus. The 7th of January dawned blue over Luzon, though cumulus piled thick near the western mountains. McGuire, recently promoted Major and now Group Operations Officer, planned an early morning 4-ship armed reconnaissance west of the San Isidro corridor. His wingman would be Captain Edwin Weaver, another quiet technician of the throttle. In North Brief, the men discussed known pockets of enemy air around Negros and Cebu, reviewed radio call signs, arranged emergency rendezvous points. At 0800, their P-38Ls lifted from Dulag, props biting humid air, heavy with diesel fumes from nearby LSTs. 40 minutes later, they crossed the Negros coastline at 10,000 feet, weaving gently to stay clear of predicted flak. Weaver reported fuel and manifold pressure steady, guns armed. They were turning south when a lone Ki-43 Oscar materialized below, banking hard towards scattered cumulus. McGuire rolled inverted, dropped flaps to 8 degrees, and dove after the fighter. Behind him, Weaver throttled up to cover. The Oscar pilot jinked left, then right, forcing McGuire progressively slower as he sought a firing solution. Altitude unwound, 5,000 feet, then 4,000. In a level chase, the Lightning's weight could be lethal, but here, in a flaps-down scissors, the twin-engine brute flirted with stall. McGuire pushed rudder, coaxed nose high, squeezed the trigger. Traces. Stitched air ahead. Nothing found metal. Weaver, watching, called, "Speed, Tom, speed!" But static fuzz clipped the transmission. At that instant, a second Oscar, unseen until its green camouflage popped from cloud shadow, dropped on Weaver's tail. Bullets spanged across the P-38's starboard boom. Weaver broke right. The attacker followed. McGuire throttled forward, abandoned his quarry, and hauled the Lightning into a steep, climbing left turn to cover his wingman. High angle of attack, airspeed bleeding, wings shuddering. The P-38 shimmied as if protesting the physics demanded of her. At 1,200 feet, the left wing stalled. The nose pitched skyward, and the Lightning snap-rolled inverted. Both Allisons coughed as fuel sloshed. One prop windmilled uselessly. Below, sugarcane fields rushed up in impossibly vivid detail. Furrows, tin-roofed shacks, a lone farmer's cart frozen in the eternal instant before impact the Lightning struck. at an angle shallow enough to plough through two tiers of cane, yet vicious enough that both engines tore free, tumbling ahead like incandescent anvils. Witnesses in the nearby barrio of Kalinog recalled a single geyser of brown earth, the scream of fractured aluminum, then silence so abrupt it seemed to swallow the sound of insects. Weaver, still dueling the second Oscar, saw the impact only. As a blossom of dust in his peripheral vision, he hauled vertical, rolled east, and dove behind cloud before calling for a homing steer. Minutes later, with fuel gauges hovering near empty, he landed at Dulag and walked into operations pale and shaking, the words, "Tom's down," the only report he could manage. On the ground, two Filipino guerrilleros, tending a makeshift, still felt the concussion rattle their tins. They reached the wreck first, machetes hacking a path through clotted cane, flames licked from ruptured wing tanks, but the cockpit remained largely intact, forward fuselage crimped as though a giant hand had crushed it. Thomas McGuire lay strapped in, head thrown sideways, visor shattered. They cut the shoulder harness, working quickly when small arms rounds began to cook off in the spreading fire, and carried him, body limp, limbs oddly angular, into a palm frond hut beyond the field's edge. A runner alerted the local USAF liaison, who in turn flagged an American crash recovery jeep threading the coastal road. By midday, a detail from the 475th arrived, guided by villagers waving strips of parachute silk. Tech Sergeant Walter Haley, who had serviced Pudgy Fee's guns that dawn, knelt beside the stretcher and wept without sound. Rain swept the site that evening, hissing over the smouldering booms. Mechanics scavenged what they could. A scorched piece of horizontal stabilizer, later stenciled with McGuire's name, a bent identification plate, his kneeboard still clipped to a map of Negros with fuel-burned figures penciled in his neat block. Hand. The chaplain read brief rites. A squad fired 3 rounds over the pressed earth grave. Only weeks later, when the front advanced, did graves registration teams exhume the body for embalming and transport to a temporary cemetery on Mindoro, from which he would ultimately journey home to Arlington. News of the loss rippled eastward faster than official communiques. Richard Bong, ensconced in a war bonds tour, learned of it via an AP wire while preparing to speak in Milwaukee. He cancelled the evening lecture, emerging only to tell a reporter that Tom McGuire was the best we had, better than me, better than any numbers game. At Nadzab, Charles MacDonald gathered the squadron under corrugated roofs and recited McGuire's standing orders about mutual support. Nobody missed the implication that ambition had nudged him beyond those very cautions. Kenny's headquarters filed the Medal of Honor recommendation anyway, citing the audacity of the Christmas sorties and noting that the Major's score, officially 38, placed him second only to Bong among American fighter aces. The investigation board convened at 5th Air Force headquarters concluded what every Lightning pilot already suspected. McGuire's attempt to reverse at low altitude with combat flaps out left him a margin of fewer than 10 knots above stall, a margin erased the moment he applied rudder. The board's somber finding read like an epitaph to all who chased the tally board. The primary cause of the accident was pilot error, induced by commitment to the protection of his wingman under conditions of extreme hazard. Weaver, whose own Oscar slid away when McGuire broke upward, never wholly forgave himself for surviving. He flew out the war, but told interviewers decades later that every dawn patrol over the Visayas began with the question of whether he would need another man's sacrifice to see sunset. Back in Sebring, Florida, Pauline McGuire received the telegram on January 13, 1945. The citrus-scented air of winter suddenly metallic in her lungs. She wrote Marilyn a letter describing the yellow Western Union envelope, how the operator's type had cut halfway through the flimsy, and she apologized that the world seemed now divided into an unbridgeable before and after. Marilyn, working double shifts at a base hospital in California, refused immediate leave, insisting that other flyers' husbands required her care too. When finally she stood at Arlington in April 1948 for the reinterment, the wind lifted the flags along Eisenhower Drive, and she whispered the pet name Pudgy once. The syllable carried off into the sycamores beside Section 11, General Order No. 24, dated March 7, 1946, confirmed the Medal of Honor. It noted with formal understatement that Major McGuire gallantly risked and ultimately gave his life in a desperate attempt to save a comrade, and that his actions on 25-26 December 1944 had materially disrupted enemy air operations over Luzon. The decoration was presented to Pauline and Marilyn in a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon. Photographs show them flanking General Carl Spaatz, each woman's hand on the medal's blue ribbon as if sharing its weight. Legacy gathered momentum after the war's thunder receded. In 1948, the former Fort Dix Army Air Force Base in New Jersey was renamed McGuire Air Force Base, the dedication ceremony featuring a P-38 taxiing beneath a floral arch, while Marilyn christened the runway with a bottle of Sebring orange champagne. Pilots of the newly formed Air Defense Command studied his gun camera footage during lectures on deflection shooting. Naval aviators, too, cited the McGuire-Weaver incident as an object lesson in energy management. How even in twin-engine powerhouses, altitude and airspeed were a fighter's only true insurance. Among the men who had flown under him, stories crystallized into folklore. There was the night he diagrammed a Zero's roll rate on a hut wall with charcoal, illustrating exactly where in the scissors a lightning could pounce. The afternoon he borrowed Charles Lindbergh's flying gloves, declaring them overrated talismans before cheerfully landing with 3 fresh victory claims. The Christmas morning he stood on an ammo crate and sang carols off-key while ground. Crews loaded belted .50 caliber into his nose bays. Each anecdote ended the same way, McGuire disappearing down a Marston matte runway, trailing twin corkscrews of dust, a silver X-tail shrinking into the steamy sky. Yet statistics alone never fully contain a life. 38 confirmed aerial victories, 11 probables, over 450 combat hours, 641 rounds of 20mm expended, all tally neatly on paper. But comrades remembered instead the shy grin when someone beat him at chess, the half-muttered prayer. He spoke before taxiing, the meticulous way he hand-greased each prop blade tip on his own aircraft, never trusting a rushed crew chief. In the Air Corps, he was called Engineer Ace, a pilot whose every maneuver carried the precision of drafted lines. In Marilyn's letters, he was merely My Tom, promising to build a lakeside bungalow and to grow old complaining about lawnmowers. As the jet age dawned, Air Force instructors wrestled with teaching students tactics in an era where closing speeds doubled and dogfights threatened to become missile exchanges at invisible ranges. Still, they found in McGuire's Luzon engagements the eternal lessons of aggression tempered by geometry. Films of his 26 December run, oscillating gun sight wobbling until Pippa and Zero converged, became mandatory viewing at Nellis for the first generation of Korean war saber pilots. Some years later would credit those frames with giving them the instinct to maintain energy while executing a high-speed yo-yo over Mig Alley. Every January 7th, the 475th Association sends a wreath to Section 11, the florist instructed to weave orange blossoms among the laurel to recall the Florida groves of his boyhood. Veterans gather, fewer each year, tracing a finger over the granite marker that reads simply Marge Thomas B. McGuire, Jr., 38 victories, MOH. They speak softly of cane fields and of a lightning's final stall, and then they drift away beneath the roar of arrivals into Reagan National, silver underbellies slicing the same cold Potomac sky he once dreamed of mastering. And still, the story stretches forward, unfinished, Because archives yield new letters, museums uncover forgotten gun camera reels, and aviation archaeologists probe the shallow crater in Kalinog, where shards of anodized aluminum lie like fossils. In each recovered scrap, there is the suggestion of more to be told. The training notes he drafted for replacements days before his last mission, the half-composed lullaby he scrawled on V-mail stationery intended for a child he never lived to father, the marginalia in his Georgia textbook where equations of lift share margins with doodles of P-38 planforms. These fragments wait in acid-free folders, their silences inviting another page of narrative, another flight yet to climb beyond the humid haze of the Visayas. The empty cockpit of McGuire's last Lightning has become an emblem not just of sacrifice, but of the delicate arithmetic of courage. How a man can spend years adding fractions of altitude, knots and rounds to a ledger, yet see the whole sum erased by a single misjudged flare of aileron. His contemporaries, who once chased his vapor trails across the steaming skies of New Guinea and the Visayas, dwindled away with the decades, but every new generation of pilots still meets him early in their studies. He appears first as a line in a table of American aces, then as gun camera grain, where a zero swells until 4 cannon flashes engulf the frame, and finally as the quiet signature on a typewritten memo explaining how to nurse a P-38 home on one engine. The lessons are not antiquarian. They are warnings and permissions spoken in the universal grammar of air combat. Fly for your wingman. Guard your energy. Know when numbers must yield to instinct, and when instinct must bow to physics. In 1963, as the Air Force prepared to retire its last active duty P-38 from photo reconnaissance duties, a ceremonial flight circled McGuire Air Force Base at dusk. The plane carried his call sign, Pudgy 6, painted in the old block letters beneath the cockpit rail. When the pilot eased the Lightning into a shallow wingover, the twin booms glinted orange against the New Jersey horizon, just long enough that a watching crowd could imagine Major McGuire banking home, engines humming in high cruise, wings unburdened. At last, by ammunition or external tanks, the base loudspeaker fell silent. No one seemed willing to break the hush that followed those receding turbos. Decades later, satellite imagery revealed that the cane fields outside Kalinog had been replanted in neat terraces of rice. From orbit, nothing remains of the crater, where Pudgy V came apart, except a faint discoloration in the soil, a darker green that shows where aluminum oxides once leached into the earth. A village school now stands less than 200 yards from the impact point, its windows bright with children's drawings. Once each spring, a visiting lecturer from the Philippine Air Force spreads a map on the classroom floor and narrates the story of the American major who would not leave his friend. The students listen wide-eyed. When the tale ends, they step outside and squint into the heat shimmer where the sky seems to melt into sugarcane, trying to picture how fast a twin-engined fighter must have been traveling and how fiercely a man must have cared to risk everything for one last climbing turn. Back in the United States, Marilyn remarried quietly in 1951, raised 2 stepchildren, and volunteered throughout her life at small aviation museums, never correcting visitors who failed to guess that the gray-haired docent explaining the quirks of turbo superchargers had once been the sweetheart behind the name on 5 successive P-38s. When she died in 2008, her ashes were interred beside Tom's in Arlington, fulfilling a request typed in the margin of his final letter home. The headstone now carries both their names. Fresh flowers appear there every August 1st, placed by pilots of the 95th Fighter Squadron during their annual visit to the cemetery. The squadron commander tells new lieutenants that the ritual is less memorial than handshake across time. A reminder that the crest on their flight suits once rode the shoulders of a man who believed discipline could bend fortune but never replace it. In the archives of the Air Force Historical Research Agency, Box 1317 contains McGuire's pocket notebook from late 1944. The last entry, written the evening of January the 6th beneath a storm lamp that flickered each time artillery rumbled across the island, reads, "Fuel first, altitude second, speed always, never alone." The graphite has smudged to a ghost of its former clarity, yet the words remain decipherable, undimmed by mildew or time. Scholars handling the artifact now slip a sheet of acid-free paper beneath it and sit for a moment before closing the lid, as though half expecting the margins to fill themselves with further counsel. They never do. The sentence is final, yet in its economy it contains an entire doctrine, one that Thomas Buchanan McGuire Jr. proved true until the instant gravity stripped the lift from his wings. So the story resolves itself, not in the thunder of victory tallies or headline superlatives, but in the steady reverberation of example. 38 confirmed victories, a Medal of Honor, a base that launches heavy transports across the Atlantic, and above all, an ethos handed down through briefing rooms and ready rooms. Fly smart, fight hard, guard the man on your wing, even if the last arithmetic of that guardianship leaves you nothing in reserve. For as long as aircraft rise into uncertain skies, the calm voice in 100 headsets will still be his, reminding each pilot that courage without calculation is waste, calculation without courage mere bookkeeping, and that the fragile equilibrium between them is where true mastery takes flight.